press button A, press button B, and good evening. And welcome to episode 33 of Shelf Analysis. You may notice one thing, firstly, which is that you're probably able to see me a lot more clearly than you've done over the previous 32 episodes. I finally figured out that after 33, I should buy a proper webcam. So as a result of which, you're not using the dodgy one on my laptop that I would have been doing since March. And instead, I've gone out and bought one of those things up there. So my genuine apologies that you can see more of my wrinkles, more of my gray hairs, and more of my lack of appropriate haircut, which probably should have happened some time back. Welcome to the program tonight. If this is your first time in, there are 32 previous episodes. You can find them all over on the YouTube channel. Just Google Ricochet or Shelf Analysis. You'll find it over on YouTube. As well as that, you'll find them on RTE Culture 2, and of course here live in the Ricochet Book Club, if that's where you're watching right now, 7 o'clock on a Wednesday evening. Couple of quick things, a bit of housekeeping, one of which is that I've had the conversation with a number of people over the last week or so, and certainly we've had the conversation in the book club about the nature of when these shows go out live. Because everybody has been in lockdown since March and since we began doing these programs, 7 o'clock seemed like a good time. It seemed to work for everybody. From conversations I've had over the last while, because people are now starting to go out into the real world, because people are now starting to get their jobs on, and times are altering for people and their kids' bedtimes to be involved, we may alter it. So I think from next week, there will be a different time for Shelf Analysis on a Wednesday. We're going to move it forward just an hour to 8 o'clock, which hopefully will make things slightly easier for everybody. I'll remind you about that at the end of the show, but it's Wednesday next week at 8 p.m. Okay, what else am I going to bring you? I'm going to bring you, firstly, we announced in the book club today, they are the books of the month for July 2020, given that it is July 2020. Two books, both from Irish authors, the first of which is this. I'll stick both up. Why don't you have a book of both of them at the same time? We can have a conversation about them. First of which is Keelan Hughes' The Wild Laughter. You will know Keelan. She's a previous guest here on Shelf Analysis. You can find her in one of the previous episodes. The Wild Laughter is supposed to be out in May, one of those books that was bumped up by a few weeks because of lockdown. The Wild Laughter is her second book after her brilliant Orchid and the Wasp, which came out a couple of years ago, which I loved and did bang on about quite a lot. The Wild Laughter is set in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crash. Cormac and Hart are brothers. Their father is not in well health, and they are forced to make decisions on the basis of the very two different people that they are. I'm anxious that I don't tell you much more about the book, because this is one of those ones that I think you need to let unfold in and of itself. If you've read Orchid and the Wasp, you'll know Keelan is a beautiful writer and her writing is extraordinary. There's no difference to that in this. This is going to be one of the books of the second half of the year. That's the first of the chosen books for July 2nd. Again, also a previous guest on Shelf Analysis, but sure hasn't everybody been at this stage, Mark O'Connell. It's his second book, Notes from an Apocalypse. Mark's book set well before all of this happened. And in fact, the apocalypse he talks about doesn't really deal with pandemics at all. He goes around the world talking to different people in different locations, everywhere from the Chernobyl exclusion zone in Pripyat to American billionaires who are buying up parts of New Zealand because they believe that in the eventuality of something going terribly wrong, New Zealand is a good place to be. Who would have thought? Right the way up to the colonization of Mars by the extremely rich. There's that, and there's a bunch of other things in between, and the whole thing is viewed through the prism of Mark having just had his first child and what sort of world his son is going to inherit, and as a result of which he attempts to try and find out more about that. The book is Notes from an Apocalypse, and that's Mark O'Connell and Keelan Hughes' The Wild Laughter. Both books available now, and both of those are our books of the month for the month of July. I know when I was promoting this event, I said that this was happening on the 1st of June. I know, look, just go gentle on me, because it's been a long few weeks. Our guest tonight is with us in a couple of minutes. Before that, really briefly, I'm going to show you what is Karina, our houseplant reading. In case you've never watched before, Karina the houseplant reads a brand new book every week, something that's just made her feel fantastic about life and that she thinks you should be reading as well. Karina, where are you? Karina's in the kitchen tonight, and Karina appears to be reading Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. Hi, Karina. How are you feeling tonight? Blown about a bit, as per usual. You seem to be fairly early on in Wolf Hall as well. You've got quite a lot going on there. You're looking forward to that? Of course you are. Okay, fantastic. Just take it handy there and grab yourself a cup of coffee. It's early in the day. Thank you, Karina, the houseplant. The thought occurred to me as well briefly before we go to our guest. At the very early part of this process, I was recommending the books that I was reading at the time. I kind of fell out of that. And a lot of that had to do with I was reading far more slowly than I would normally. Certainly in the early part of lockdown, I was finding it very, very hard to read. And we had conversations about this here and in the book club as well. Things have gotten much better since then. So over the course of the next few weeks, every week, I'll give you a shout as to what I'm reading. I'm reading 2 at the moment, but I'm going to give you a suggestion as to this one might be worth it for you. Not only because of the beautiful cover. This is Ta-Nehisi Coates' The Water Dancer. The book has been out for a few months, and it's one that was on a recommended list that I saw over the last while. It had been sitting in the TBR pile as one that should be read. I'm about 3/4 of the way through. It is a beautifully, exquisitely written book about one man who was born on a plantation in Virginia at the very end of the world of slavery having its place in the world. Slavery has just about been ended, but not quite. There are free slaves. He is not one of them. The world of influence that the plantation owners in Georgia, which comes from tobacco, is all starting to fall to pieces. He himself, Hiram, who's the main lead character in the book, is the son of the plantation owner. And again, I don't want to reveal a huge amount else to you beyond that as part of this book, save to say that there's a touch of magical realism in it. It is an exquisitely written book by a man who's considered to be one of the men of letters of note in African-American writing in the 21st century. This is his first fiction, and it's his first novel. And so far, it's been utterly compelling all the way through. It is, sorry, again, one more time, because I'm terrible for doing these things. It is called The Water Dancer. It does have a beautiful cover, and it's by Ta-Nehisi Coates. That's what I'm reading at the moment. I'll tell you what I'm into next week as well. Where are we? 8 minutes in already, and I haven't brought in our guest. I could not be more thrilled than to have our guest on tonight. This has taken a couple of weeks of organization, and I'm so glad that it came through. I'm going to press the button somewhere here. Here I go, and bring you the winner of this year's Booker Prize, amongst many, many other things, Bernardine Evaristo. Bernardine, let me press this button and say, how are you? There you go. Hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. Hello.
Thanks a million
hello,
for coming on the show.
You're welcome.
How are you doing?
I'm very good. Yeah, very. Lots happening.
Tell me, because that's I suppose part of the conversation is that before I ask you anything else, because obviously it's been one of those weeks for you already, in terms of congratulations on winning at the Nibbies.
Yes, it's been real roller coaster actually since I won the Booker. So on Monday I won the British Book Award Author of the Year and also the British Book Award for Fiction. So I got 2 awards, and on Friday last I got the Independent Book Award for Fiction. So my life's very surreal at the moment, and I'm really enjoying it.
It's been one of those things as well, in that I saw obviously a number of articles were written during the week in that yourself and Candice Carty-Williams had both won at the British Book Awards, and both of you were it was the first time that a Black woman had won in either of those categories ever.
Well, actually, I don't think it's just Black women. I think person of color. I think
ever. That seems like an extraordinary thing to say in 2020.
It is, and also a writer called Oyinkan Braithwaite, who wrote a really lovely crime novel called My Sister the Serial Killer.
Yeah, which is
she
super.
won in her category, crime and thriller, and she was the first as well. So it's not very good. You know, it's nice to win, but at the same time, it shouldn't be happening now for the first time.
Do you think, and again, I suppose this is part of discussions that I've seen happening both online and discussions I've seen happening in our own book club, even over the last maybe 4, 5, 6 weeks, that there is a deliberate move from readers to attempt to seek out more books by writers of color that they would never have thought about finding otherwise.
Yes,
but that's happening.
It has been absolutely credible, and it's all been around the Black Lives Matter movement, and people have been curating these lists of Black books to read, and a lot of those books are Black British books. Last week in the bestseller list in the UK, there were 10 books out of 40 on the bestseller list, the top 10, by writers of colour. Happy to say that I was there as well. And that's never happened before. So there's a lot of history that's being made. And I think what it tells us is the argument is that they are interested in these books. And these books are selling and have the potential to sell and always have had. And the publishing industry needs to catch up, really, and be a publishing industry for all kinds of writers from all kinds of communities, for all kinds of readers. And they've been a bit slow in making moves towards making sure that happens.
That is one of the central discussions in this, though, isn't it, about the nature of publishing having been a gatekeeper of a certain kind over the course of decades and decades now, and all of a sudden realizing we may be well behind a curve here.
I think so. And it's there, even at the most basic level, there is an economic argument for it, because books are selling really well. My book's selling really well, and it's an experimental novel about 12 Black British women. It's so I think there's an appetite among readers for all kinds of literature. Those books have to be published, and then they need to be marketed in such a way that they reach as wide an audience as possible.
Well, now that we're here and now that you've just mentioned it, let's say, for instance, you were dealing with a hypothetical person who's been living under a rock maybe for the last 6 months or so and doesn't really know anything about girl, woman, other. Maybe tell us in your own words about what the book is about.
Yes, so it's a novel about 12 primarily Black British women and their interconnected lives. They are a huge variety. They embody a huge variety of womanhood. One is a trans character who is non-binary, and so I sometimes say Womxn, Womxn, which includes trans people. They are aged 19 to 93. They come from different cultural backgrounds. Some are rooted in Africa, some are rooted in the Caribbean. Most of them are born and raised in Britain. They have different professions. They are of different classes. They have different sexualities. About a quarter of the women are on the queer spectrum. And that was very important to me, to just normalize it in that way. And it's about their lives. It's about their celebrating their lives overall, I guess, but also about their struggles and their ambitions and their dreams and their relationships, and their 4 mother-daughters relationships in the book out of the 12. And it is just about the multiplicity of our lives.
I've always wanted to, if I ever did an event with you, I was going to ask you about, like, for some people that, they may literally believe that you're this overnight success, that the book has turned up and all of a sudden that this has just been this month. Obviously, you've been a writer for a very long time. Did you have any sense when you were writing Girl, Woman, Other that this might be potentially the one that was going to be very different to the others?
I have been. It's my 8th book, and my first book was published in 94, and I started writing professionally in 1982. So it's been a really long overnight success. When I started writing the book, nothing about it was topical. Nobody was interested in reading Black British women's fiction, to be honest. It was just not on the agenda. Black Lives Matter happened, Me Too happened in that period, so I started it in 2013. And then after that happened, I started to think, oh, this book is suddenly might be seen as topical, and it might do something really interesting. It might actually get out there and break through. But at the same time, I'm used to that not happening. So I didn't really put much store by it. And then it did happen, and there was a big take up compared to my previous books. And then the Booker, of course, changed everything. It completely changed everything. And then that gave me this wide readership that I've got now. So it was an interesting journey. I think if the book had been written 10 years ago, published 10 years ago, I'm not sure about the kind of reception it would have had. I don't know if the sort of culture was quite ready for it.
I think that could be true about so many books and so many times, though. The right time, right place, right book sometimes is vitally important. What's interesting as well is that I think the last time I saw you on TV was on Question Time in the UK. So it's not just that you are developing, obviously, this huge influence with your readers, but it also is now you are becoming one of those people who's in completely different spectrums, but talking about this as well. Is that strange? Is that weird to find yourself in those kind of spaces?
I guess so. On the platforms that I've been on, for sure, because I have been an activist for the arts, for inclusion in the arts also for a very, very long time. And I have been shouting out about things for a long time. And a lot of those projects that I've been behind, or those initiatives that I've set up, I feel like I've been banging my head against a brick wall, and basically the sort of so-called establishment, the media and so on, haven't been very interested. Suddenly they are interested. And doing question time was a very big breakthrough for me. They have asked me in the last year to do it. I was so scared to do question time because it's brutal, and it's so exposing, and everybody watches it and everybody's got an opinion about it. And I was like, oh, I can't do it. And they asked me to do it this time a few weeks ago, and I said no. No, I said yes, and then I thought about it and said no, I'm not going to do it. And so I emailed and said no. And then Fiona Bruce got on the phone to me, and like, Fiona Bruce is the headmistress or the head girl, you know.
Yeah.
I was like, yes, I'll do it. And so she basically very kindly just talked about the program, and I just thought, oh well, I've met you now on the phone, and you're obviously great, and so I said yes to it. And then when I was there, to be honest, I loved it. I love being in the room with a particular politician and to hear what he had to say and then to come back at him, and that was very powerful for me, very empowering.
And it's the strange thing as well of, I did not see that episode. I don't watch Question Time, but they clipped it and I saw it on social media, because then it develops a completely different life when the following day and week when it turns up on social media as well. That's the kind of reach that something like that has, which is really interesting.
It is. I mean, I am a writer first and foremost. That's what I do. I write novels, and I'm a literary activist. But sometimes you've got to step up, and especially if you're interested and aren't afraid to say what you've got to say and stand by it. Then I think one's got to take those platforms and reach a wider audience with whatever it is one believes in. So that's what I did, and I will do it again, because now I've got a taste of it. I like the power.
I can understand that. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Ostensibly, why you're here is to recommend for you like and you love. The criteria always for authors who come on Shelf Analysis is it can be new, can be old, doesn't matter what it is. It can be something from 100 years ago, something you've read in proof. It's not that important. You picked a few tonight, which I really like the idea of. So maybe have a start and tell us what sort of things you recommend tonight.
So again, my choices for these kinds of things tend to be books by writers of colour, because I want to promote the books that I think might be ignored or just not get the attention that they need. And I've come up with several of them, although they're not all by writers of colour, but most of them are. So the first one is a book called A Portable Paradise by a writer called Roger Robinson. It's a poetry collection. And I have actually known Roger Robinson for about 25 years now. And he won the T.S. Eliot Prize in January for this collection. And he also won something called the Ondaatje Prize for this book. And I was over the moon for him, because he is such a good writer. And this book is exquisite. And it really is his masterpiece. And so I think it just deserves to be read by everybody, especially if you like poetry, but you don't have to like poetry. And it's a book that looks at sort of various cultural moments, but also some of the poems are very personal. He has a son who was premature and was basically sort of the size of his hand when he was born, and was in intensive care for a very long time. And he's got the most amazing poems about his son, and so emotional about just him being born, and then this process of not knowing whether he's going to survive. So he has these really emotional personal poems, and then he also has written about Grenfell Tower and the death of the people in the Grenfell Tower, but he's written about it in a really beautiful and imaginative way. And he's written a little bit about Windrush, and also about black men living in Brixton, and all of the poetry is gorgeous. So A Portable Paradise by Roger Robinson, please do have a look.
And I think that's one of those things that people have been finding, certainly from talking to authors throughout the course of this series, is there's been a lot of poetry recommended, and they've been caveated sometimes with, even if you don't normally read poetry, simply because for people who are maybe finding it hard to get into reading, who maybe think they don't have the concentration at the moment, poetry seems to be a wonderful gateway for people at the moment. So that's a brilliant idea. Okay,
that's right. And also, poetry doesn't have to be difficult. Roger's poetry is deep and beautiful, but it's not difficult. You can read it and understand it. So but people should just have a go and see how they get on with it. So the second book is called Black Rain Falling by a writer called Jacob Ross, who this is the second in a series of crime fiction. Jacob Ross, again, I do like literary books and I do like beautiful writing. And Jacob Ross
Mhm.
is an incredibly beautiful writer. He's written several books, but they've been literary fiction. But now he's working on crime fiction, but they're also literary fiction.
Mhm.
And he has done something that very few people have done, which is to set crime fiction in the Caribbean. And this is about somebody called Digger, who's a police inspector. He's just a young boy, really, but he very quickly becomes a police inspector. And it's about the cases he has to solve. And this novel is about what happens when one of his police colleagues, kills somebody, and what is unravelled as a result of that. And it's set on the island of Camaho, which is a fictional island, but he's looking at the underbelly of that society. And so there's the beautiful writing, but it's also got the real suspense and thrillerish quality to it. And like I said, not many crime fiction novels coming out from the Caribbean. So it's really unusual and hasn't had a lot of attention. And I wish people would buy it because it's definitely worth it. And I think it will have a wide appeal for people.
And that's called Black Rain Falling. Okay,
Yeah,
fantastic.
by Jacob Ross.
Okay.
My next book is a book that I have promoted a bit at the moment because very few Black British novels are published, and certainly not Black gay novels. This is a writer called Paul Mendes. It's his first book, and it's called Rainbow Milk. And it is semi-autobiographical, and he talks about the fact that it's sort of based on his younger self. And it's
Mhm.
about a young black gay guy from the Caribbean family growing up in the Black Country in England, in the Midlands, and he comes from a Jehovah Witness family, and he's gay. So you can imagine there's an immediate clash there. So it's about him coming of age in that very stultifying community, and then he escapes to London and has a pretty wild time in London, and actually becomes a prostitute for a while, and it's quite graphic, so there's trigger warning there, but
Yep.
it's really the writing is lively, energetic, scintillating, the story is fresh, and it's a brilliant book, and I hope it does well. I hope it makes some
Fantastic.
lists. Yep.
Paul Mendes. Gotcha.
Paul
Okay.
Mendes, yes.
Okay.
The next book, I think, probably won't need much introduction soon.
Mm.
It's called The Vanishing
Yeah.
Half by Britt Bennett. And I tend to like to promote British books because I think American books, everybody reads them and they get so much attention. But this book is a very special book. It's currently on the Sunday Times bestseller list for a reason.
Mhm.
It's word of mouth is spreading very quickly. Her first book was something called The Mothers, a book called The Mothers, which I haven't read, but I'm going to read it. And that did very well and was a big hit in America. This is her second book. She's still only 30, which surprises me because she is such a good writer. She is such a good storyteller. It's about this small community in America where everybody is black, but they're really light skinned. And that's their thing. And they don't want anybody darkening the skin tone of the population. So the light skinned people marry light skinned people. It is what we call colorism,
Mhm.
which is like a sub branch of racism. So, colorism is where you are discriminated against according to the shade of your skin, not just that you're a generic black person, but that how light you are. And it's something that is kind of internalized within black communities, but it's also something in terms of how society sees us, depending on how light your skin is. It's about two sisters, twins, who are very, very light skinned, and by the time they get to their late teens, one decides to pass for white, which is always really interesting. And she does. And it's about their lives after. So it's about their lives before and after, and their children. And it's also extremely well plotted, this novel. So it's not just one of those literary novels where, it's lovely to read, but there isn't much pace to it. It's really riveting. So interesting subject matter and fantastic writing and very suspenseful. It's just been sold to a Hollywood film company, and I think there were 17 film companies bidding to make this into a film. That is unbelievable. So that's
Yeah.
how hot this book is.
I've seen a lot of conversation about that, and it is sitting very close to the top of my to be read pile downstairs. So yeah,
Yes,
that's
yes.
absolutely. I think that's going to be huge over the next couple of
Yes,
months.
and it's kind of one of those books. I think people are going to love it. I just think once she's such a good storyteller. I'm a very cynical reader. I start reading a book, I'm like, okay, let's see what this is all about. I don't care whether it's been hyped to the hilt or what. And I start
Mhm.
it, yeah, okay. And then with hers, I got into it, and I'm like, yeah, well, let's see if she can sustain it. And she did from the beginning to end. And I was traveling, and when I travel, I'm very careful about what books I take with me, especially on planes, especially if it's a long journey, because I don't want to be stuck without a book to
Sure.
read. This one I had started, so I thought, okay, I'm going to take the risk. I'm going to take it with me, and I was so happy. It was like so. It's just such great company, great company.
Fantastic. Lovely.
Now,
Okay.
this isn't a black book, but I think it's a really important book. You might have heard of it. It's called The Five by Hallie Rubenhold, and it was published last year. And it's telling the story of the five women who were killed by Jack the Ripper. And it is astonishing. She does a really good job of telling her story. She's done a lot of research. She brings them to life. And then you realise that the story of Jack the Ripper has all been about him. And these women have been vilified in that narrative. And she
Hmm.
completely disrupts the nonsense that has been said about these women. They were all prostitutes. They were this. They were that, and presents them as fully fledged human beings who were victims of this awful man. And it just, for me, this book brought home to me what I know already and what I tried to do in my own work. But it really kind of embodied the fact that the way history is told is nearly always told from a particular viewpoint. And that is not the
Hmm.
viewpoint of the working class or of women. It's a very male perspective on how history is created. And this book really tells you that, because all of us, we've all lived with the myth of Jack the Ripper over 100 years. And this is the first book that is bringing these women to life and saying, look, these were human beings, and this was their lives, and they need to shine now. And they had difficult lives, so they were vulnerable women. And it's a reimagining of that story, but also telling us a lot about Victorian England and about what it was like
That's fantastic. We've already got.
from a female and
No,
working class perspective. Sorry.
not at all. This is the internet. That's the best thing about doing one of these things in the internet. We've done quite well so far in terms of not managing to interrupt each other. This has been great. Catherine says in
Yes.
comments, she says, "I love the five. There was awesome research done for it." Jackie just says, "I've started Girl, Woman, Other last week. It's fantastic. I love it." If you want to stick a comment below, just really quickly to say something to Bernadine, you can do that now. Have you got one more for us, or are you
I've got a
in with the
couple
list?
more.
Yeah.
Couple
Oh yeah,
more.
great. Okay, go for
So
it, please.
again, this is about very recent history, the Windrush betrayal. So people will have heard about the Windrush scandal
Mhm.
and the fact that over 1,000 people were basically persecuted by the government, and they had every right to be in this country. And the government the government burnt or destroyed a lot of the landing cards for people who came in the 50s and 60s. And it proved very difficult for people to prove that they'd been here this long. And because of the hostile environment, which we know about, which Theresa May brought it about, these people were persecuted. Over 100 people were deported back to the Caribbean, even though they had come here as little children, and they had every right to be in this country. There was a television drama called Sitting in Limbo,
Yeah.
which came on the BBC, it's still there, I think.
Mm.
When was it? A couple of weeks
It
ago.
was quite recently. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, and everyone should watch it. It's hard. It's really hard to watch, and it's about this guy. It's based on one of the guys in this book called Anthony Bryan, and he came to the UK when he was about 9, and suddenly he gets the Home Office writing to him saying you have no right to be here, and he gets all the evidence together that he's supposed to get together to show that he's been in the UK for some 50 years, and he came with his parents, and they still try to deport him. And it was only when Amelia Gentleman, who is the journalist who wrote this book, got in touch with the Home Office, because they're scared of her now, got in touch with them because the Windrush scandal was blowing up, that they eventually released him, because he was basically imprisoned twice. And he's somebody who was released and is now back with his family, but obviously really traumatized. But so
Sure.
many people. have suffered as a result of this scandal, and this book tells their stories, and it's a fantastic read.
And
The
Amelia
last book,
Gentleman also has an extraordinary name for an author of any kind. I mean, everybody should be called Amelia Gentleman. It's
I
wonderful.
know they should. And then the
Okay,
final book is kind of
fun.
like in conversation with Amelia's book, and it's
Hmm.
by Colin Grant. It's called Homecoming, and it's voices of the Windrush generation. So what he did, and Colin Grant was a journalist for about 20 years, he just went around and he interviewed the Windrush generation, fully aware these are the older people who came, not the younger people, like the people in their 80s and 90s, fully aware that that generation is not going to be around forever. So he interviewed them, and then he wrote up their stories in the first person. And so this is them talking about themselves directly to him, and it's beautiful. It was Radio 4 book of the week, so everybody could hear. It might even still be available on Radio
Yep.
4. So yeah, so this is the Windrush generation in their own voices. That's it.
They are extraordinary suggestions, and it was what I was looking for. That was exactly what we were hoping to get by having you on.
Yes.
It's been genuinely lovely. Maybe one day we will get to do this in reality, somewhere on a stage in front of other people somewhere in Ireland. That would be amazing. How has lockdown been for you? I forgot to ask that question at the beginning. In terms of what's it been like for you over the last 3 months?
It's become a very good experience. At first, I was really worried because you just didn't know. I mean, I'm sure everybody felt the same. You didn't know what this thing was and how you could catch it and how it was going to affect life and everything. Of course, everything shut down. Everything I got planned for this year was cancelled. I had to look after my mother, or rather had to. I wanted to. My mother's 86 and she needed some care. So I was on this care rota with her, and I was really worried about that because I was worried that somebody who was looking after her would pass it on if not me. And so that was a big worry, but she's okay now. But then actually, as it's continued, it's been quite, and I know I'm very privileged, and you have to say that because we know that there are people, many people, who are suffering so badly, not just through bereavements, of which we have such a ridiculous number of deaths, but also just because of their living situations and so on. So I know that. But for me, it has become very peaceful. And I'm somebody who travels a lot. I'm always on the tube. I'm always running around. I'm always seeing people. And actually, I don't miss any of it. It's just brought a level of inner peace, just being at home all the time and walking and doing some exercising and going to the supermarket. And that's it. And doing this kind of thing.
I've heard a lot of people say similar things.
You have, yeah.
And I got a couple of things just before we finish up, because I've got Casey, who says, I'm fascinated to know the reasoning for the paucity in punctuation throughout girl, woman, other, which I absolutely love, by the way. That's kind of a question, kind of a statement.
Yes, it is. It's experimental. I call it fusion fiction. It allowed me, I really enjoyed writing without full stops. There are some, but not many. It's really freeing, actually, to get rid of the full stops. And interestingly enough, I got a letter from somebody who is dyslexic, who really struggles to read. She said she just absolutely tore through Girl, Woman, Other. And she said because there were no full stops, she didn't have to worry about the sentences. I was like, wow, isn't that interesting? And as a writer, I didn't have to worry about the sentences. I could just connect to the story and get into the heart of it and write it. And then hopefully for the reader, it's a free-flowing reading experience. If you go with it, if you look at it on the pages like, I'm not going to read this. But actually, you just follow. The punctuation really is in the spacing of the paragraphs, or the lines on the page. And it allowed me to kind of capture so much about these characters in a few words, 30 pages each, and you know them deeply inside, you know their interiority. And I think that was made possible through that form. And then that form also allowed me, I think, to write the 12 characters. So it's like this one cohesive novel rather than lots of short stories. So that's my sort of thinking around the punctuation.
And I think that should be our final recommendation for tonight, that people should read The Extraordinary Girl, Woman, Other, not just because it's won a hat load of prizes, and not just because everybody else is reading it at the moment and it's selling like hotcakes, but because of that. This has been an absolute joy. Thank you so much for taking out the time tonight to have the conversation with me. Bernardine Evaristo, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thanks a million. Well, that went well, didn't it? And there you go. That's that. We will have a brand new episode for you next Wednesday night. 8 o'clock is going to be the new time. Just one thing to pay attention to next Wednesday night. The next episode, episode 34 of Shelf Analysis, is going to be at 8 p.m. here in the Ricochet Book Club. Of course, if you miss any episodes, you can find them on the YouTube channel. All you need to do is just look up Ricochet Shelf Analysis on YouTube, and you'll find them all on RTE Culture as well with our friends there. Have a lovely one, and I'll see you here same time next week.